The cop smirked, pouring hot coffee on the old black veteran's shirt. A power move. But he didn't see the man who trained generals and shaped leaders. He only saw a target. A mistake that would dismantle his world. The smell of cinnamon and burnt sugar hung in the morning brew cafe, a comfortable scent for a comfortable town. That comfort shattered the moment Deputy Chad Rollins decided he wanted a new seat. His target was Sergeant Major James "Sarge" Holloway, a 68-year-old retired Green Beret who sat in the second booth every Wednesday, a quiet pillar of the community. Rollins, a man whose uniform was a size too tight and whose authority was a size too large, swaggered over. "Gonna need this booth, old-timer," he said, not asking. Holloway looked up from his newspaper, his eyes calm and clear. "Good morning to you too, Deputy." The polite refusal was enough to ignite Rollins's short fuse. He saw not a decorated soldier who had advised generals, but simply a black man in his way. "I guess some people need a lesson in respecting the badge," Rollins sneered, his voice loud enough for the whole cafe to hear. He picked up Holloway's steaming cup of coffee. Time seemed to slow. The barista froze mid-pour. A teenage boy in the corner, Jada, instinctively raised his phone. With a look of pure, petty malice, Rollins tilted the cup and poured the hot, dark liquid directly onto the front of Holloway's clean, pressed shirt. A collective gasp rippled through the cafe, followed by a thick, shocked silence. The coffee soaked through the fabric, a dark, spreading stain. But Holloway didn't flinch. He didn't cry out. He didn't even stand. He simply sat there, a bastion of stillness, and looked directly at Rollins. It wasn't a look of anger or fear. It was a look of profound, weary disappointment, the look of a man who had seen the worst of humanity and was saddened to find it here, in a small-town cafe. "You've made a mistake, son," Holloway said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of a command. Rollins laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Oh yeah? What are you gonna do? Call your kids?" "I won't have to," Holloway replied, placing his napkin neatly on the table. At that moment, Jada, the teenager with the phone, panned his camera past the scene of humiliation. He zoomed in on the community bulletin board by the door. Pinned right in the center was a glossy flyer from the city. It showed a vibrant, smiling black woman in a sharp suit. The caption read, "Congratulations to Ridgeway's new district attorney, Aaliyah Vance." And in the photo, she was shaking hands with the man in the coffee-stained shirt. A smaller line below quoted her, "Inspired by my mentor and lifelong role model, Sergeant Major James Holloway." The coffee stain on Holloway's shirt was an insult, but the real violation was against something much deeper. It was a violation of a promise. When James Holloway retired from the U.S. Army Special Forces after 30 years, he didn't retreat into a quiet life. He saw the same lack of direction and wasted potential in the youth of his hometown that he had seen in young soldiers lost to poor leadership on the battlefield. So he made a new vow. He would serve his community as he had served his country. He wouldn't let any of his kids get left behind. He became a mentor, a force of quiet discipline and unwavering support in a town that often overlooked its own. He coached youth sports, ran after-school study groups, and personally guided dozens of young people away from trouble and towards college or military service. Aaliyah Vance was his greatest success story. He'd found her as a brilliant but fiercely rebellious teenager, a girl whose sharp tongue and defiant energy were leading her straight toward a juvenile detention center. He saw past the anger. He saw a warrior. He challenged her, trained her mind like he would a recruit's, and channeled her righteous fury into a passion for the law. He taught her that the sharpest weapon wasn't a fist, but a well-reasoned argument. He paid for her first LSAT prep course. He was in the front row at her law school graduation. The attack in the cafe wasn't just coffee on a shirt. It was a direct assault on everything he had built. It was the chaos and disrespect he had fought his entire life to contain, both abroad and at home. When Deputy Rollins poured that coffee, he wasn't just humiliating a man, he was desecrating a community institution. He was telling every child Holloway had ever mentored that the respect and discipline they were taught meant nothing in the face of a man with a badge and a bad attitude. Holloway knew he had to respond, not for his own pride, but for the promise he had made to an entire generation. The video, uploaded by Jada with the simple title, "Disrespect in Ridgeway," was a spark thrown on dry tinder. By noon, it was a wildfire. The 47-second clip was brutal in its simplicity: Rollins's sneer, the deliberate pour, Holloway's immovable stillness, and the final, devastating zoom-in on the bulletin board. The story exploded. #JusticeForSarge trended nationally. In her new corner office overlooking the town square, District Attorney Aaliyah Vance watched the video on her phone, her knuckles white as she gripped the desk. Her mentor, the man who had taught her how to stand up to bullies, being publicly humiliated. The rage she felt was personal, but her response would be professional. This was no longer just a viral video, it was Exhibit A. Her team was already fielding calls from the media. The sheriff's department had issued a terse, "We are aware of the incident and it is under review" statement, the classic bureaucratic shield. Aaliyah knew what that meant. An internal review would lead to a slap on the wrist, a temporary suspension, and a quiet reinstatement when the public's attention moved on. Not this time. She walked into her press briefing room, the cameras flashing. She didn't read from a statement. She spoke from the heart, with the precise, controlled anger Holloway had taught her to wield. "Good afternoon. I'm sure many of you have seen a deeply disturbing video circulating today, filmed here in our town," she began, her voice steady. "The actions depicted in that video are not just an insult to a respected citizen, they are a potential criminal offense and a profound violation of public trust." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "Therefore, I am announcing today that the District Attorney's Office is launching a full and independent investigation into the conduct of Deputy Chad Rollins. This will not be an internal matter. It will be handled by my office, and we will follow the evidence wherever it leads." The digital battle had been joined. The power had shifted from a cell phone camera to the highest legal authority in the county. Aaliyah Vance had just fired the opening shot. Aaliyah's investigation began with a formal request for all of Deputy Rollins's personnel files, use of force reports, and past citizen complaints. The response from the sheriff's department was technically compliant but practically obstructive. Files were delivered slowly, key documents were heavily redacted, and Sheriff Miller, Rollins's boss and a relic of the town's old guard, was suddenly unavailable for comment. But Aaliyah had an asset the sheriff couldn't control: Sergeant Major Holloway. While Aaliyah's team battled the bureaucracy, Holloway conducted his own quiet reconnaissance. He didn't need a badge, he had something more powerful: the community's trust. He sat in the back of the same cafe, and people came to him. A Hispanic business owner who described being shaken down by Rollins for donations to the police fund. An elderly woman whose son was arrested by Rollins for loitering on his own porch, a case that was dropped but cost the family thousands in legal fees. Holloway listened, took notes with military precision, and passed the credible leads, names, dates, locations, to Aaliyah's chief investigator. He was running a human intelligence network from a coffee shop booth. The breakthrough came when Holloway connected Aaliyah with a retired deputy who despised Sheriff Miller's "good old boy" system. The ex-deputy provided a crucial piece of the puzzle. He described a practice known internally as clearing the slate. Whenever a complaint against a favored deputy like Rollins was filed, Sheriff Miller would have it informally mediated off the books, ensuring no official paper trail was created. The complaints vanished. Armed with this information, Aaliyah's investigators issued a subpoena not just for the official complaints, but for all digital records, emails, and text messages mentioning the names of the victims Holloway had identified. They were no longer just investigating one deputy, they were investigating a conspiracy to obstruct justice, led by the sheriff himself. The rot was deeper than one bad apple, it was in the roots of the tree. Sheriff Miller and the police union didn't take the investigation lying down. They saw Aaliyah Vance not as a prosecutor seeking justice, but as a political threat to their entrenched power. Their counterattack was swift and dirty. They began by leaking information to a friendly local blogger, painting Aaliyah as an activist DA on a personal vendetta. The narrative they pushed was simple and poisonous. She was only doing this because the man in the video was her mentor. They framed the investigation not as a pursuit of justice, but as a personal favor, an abuse of her office. Next, the police union issued a public statement expressing deep concern over the DA's anti-police rhetoric, claiming that her aggressive investigation was demoralizing officers and making the town less safe. They organized a support law enforcement rally, a thinly veiled show of force against Aaliyah. The mayor, a cautious politician who relied on the union's endorsement, called Aaliyah into a private meeting. "Aaliyah, you're creating a firestorm," he said, wringing his hands. "Can't you just let the sheriff handle Rollins internally? We need to think about city stability." Aaliyah stood her ground. "With all due respect, Mayor, the city isn't stable if a man in uniform can assault a citizen in broad daylight without consequence. The firestorm isn't my creation, it's a reaction to the disease my office is trying to cure." The most personal attack was aimed at Holloway. The same blog published an article questioning his military service, using vague, unsubstantiated claims from anonymous sources to hint at a troubled past. They were trying to tarnish his honor, the very foundation of his identity. Holloway read the article, folded the newspaper neatly, and placed it in the trash. He had faced down propaganda and disinformation in war zones. This was amateur hour. The attacks only confirmed his assessment: the enemy was cornered, and they were getting desperate. The old guard strategy backfired. Instead of isolating Aaliyah and Holloway, the attacks galvanized the community. The smear campaign against Holloway, a man who had mentored half the town's children, was seen as a desperate, dishonorable act. The Voices for Justice movement began organically. It started with a single mother posting on the town's Facebook page, "Deputy Rollins pulled a gun on my 16-year-old for having a broken taillight. I was too scared to file a complaint then. I'm not scared anymore." Her post opened the floodgates. Dozens of others shared their own stories of harassment and intimidation, all linked to Rollins and a handful of other deputies under Sheriff Miller's protection. Holloway became the quiet epicenter of this groundswell. He transformed the Morning Brew Cafe into an unofficial intake center. People who were terrified of walking into a police station felt safe talking to Sarge. He'd sit with them, listen patiently, and help them draft clear, factual statements. He wasn't giving legal advice, he was giving them the courage to speak. Each evening, he would deliver a new batch of sworn affidavits to Aaliyah's office. The stack of files on her desk grew, forming a damning mosaic of systemic abuse. There were traffic stops that inexplicably turned into baseless searches, noise complaints that escalated into arrests for resisting, and civil forfeiture cases where cash disappeared without proper documentation. The community wasn't just supporting the investigation anymore, they were becoming the investigation. They were a chorus of testimony that drowned out the union's press releases and the mayor's calls for calm. The old guard had tried to make this about one man and one woman. The community made it about everyone. With a mountain of evidence and overwhelming public support, Aaliyah Vance knew it was time to end the shadow war and bring the battle into the light. She called a major press conference on the steps of the county courthouse. The scene was electric. News vans from 3 different states lined the street. Community members, holding signs that read, "We stand with Sarge" and "DA Vance is our voice," filled the square. Aaliyah walked to the podium, projecting an aura of unshakable confidence. Sergeant Major Holloway stood a few feet behind her, to her right. He wore his simple tweed jacket, his arms crossed, his presence a silent, powerful endorsement. For the past several weeks, Aaliyah began, her voice ringing out clear and strong, "My office has been investigating not just the actions of a single deputy, but a culture of impunity that has been allowed to fester within our sheriff's department." She laid it all out. She announced that a grand jury had voted to indict Deputy Rollins on felony assault charges. Then, she dropped the bombshell. She announced a sweeping, multi-count indictment against Sheriff Miller himself, for obstruction of justice, witness tampering, and conspiracy. She named 3 other deputies who were also facing charges. It was a complete decapitation of the department's corrupt leadership. As the reporters erupted in a frenzy of questions, Aaliyah held up a hand. "I will take one more question." A reporter shouted, "Sergeant Major Holloway, do you have any comment on this outcome?" All eyes turned to the old soldier. He stepped forward, not to the main podium, but just to the side of it. He looked out over the crowd, his gaze finding the faces of the people he had listened to in the cafe. "The first lesson I ever taught her," he said, his voice quiet but carrying to every microphone, "was to always stand on the side of truth, no matter the cost." He paused and looked at Aaliyah with profound pride. Today, she did. He then stepped back, his part in the public battle finished. In the aftermath, the old guard collapsed. Rollins was convicted. Sheriff Miller resigned in disgrace, his trial pending. The state stepped in to oversee the sheriff's department, implementing the very reforms Aaliyah had championed. The town of Ridgeway began to breathe again. A few months later, James Holloway sat in his usual booth at the Morning Brew Cafe. The morning sun streamed through the window, warming his face. The air smelled of cinnamon and hope. He was reading a newspaper, a small smile on his face. The bell above the door jingled. Jada, the teenager who filmed the video, walked in. He was taller now, his posture more confident. He saw Holloway, hesitated for a moment, then walked over to the booth. "Sarge," he said, his voice respectful. He awkwardly brought his hand up in a salute. It wasn't perfect, but it was heartfelt. Holloway looked up, his eyes crinkling at the corners. He slowly, deliberately, returned the salute with the crisp precision of a lifelong soldier. "At ease, young man," he said warmly. "Good to see you." The torch had been passed. The guard had changed. And in the quiet corner of a small-town cafe, the promise to a generation was being kept. True leadership isn't about power, it's about the legacy you build. Who was your mentor? Share your story and comment "Legacy" to honor those who guide us. Subscribe for more stories that inspire.